I would like to welcome all the participants. This is the first in the board member series that we are inaugurating during this age of COVID and Zoom. We are also inaugurating another series, the author speaking series. We'll have a program this Thursday featuring Mark Noland and Steph Haggard. Let me acknowledge the presence in the virtual space of our board member, David Maxwell, also Ambassador Donna Lady Dugan, a great friend and supporter of HRNK, Marcus Noland, member of the board of directors, and my mother, Dr. Elena Scarlatoiu. It is a great privilege to introduce today's program. I like to believe that it is a very timely program, a program about the very special role of the special envoy, and what better speakers than the two former ambassadors and special envoys from the United States and the Republic of Korea. We're joined today by the Honorable Roberta Cohen, who is co-chair emeritus of our organization, the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. She's a specialist in human rights, humanitarian, and refugee issues, has often been described as a trailblazer on many of these issues. She is the one who internationalized the issues of IDPs, internally displaced persons, while she was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights. She integrated further, she made great progress in integrating human rights into US foreign policy. And of course, for many years now, she's known for her work on North Korea, multiple publications, events, very significant contributions. So today we're truly joined by three luminaries, thought leaders, diplomats. Our two other speakers are the Honorable Robert King, who was U.S. Special Envoy for North Korean human rights issues until January 2017. Ambassador King also worked as Chief of Staff to the late Congressman Tom Lantos, the only Holocaust survivor ever to sit in the US Congress. Prior to that, he was also a scholar of Eastern Europe. I always like to mention that Ambassador King wrote a history of the Romanian Communist Party in the 1980s. Ambassador King holds his PhD in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Ambassador Jung Hoon, joining us very early in the morning in Korea, was the Republic of Korea government's inaugural ambassador for North Korean human rights. He was inaugurated in September 2016. Prior to that, he had already served for 3 years as ambassador for human rights. Currently, he continues to be a scholar and also dean of the Graduate School of International Studies, GSIS, at Yonsei University. He also founded the Yonsei Center for Human Liberty at Yonsei University. He has taught at multiple prestigious academic institutions. He received his BA from Tufts, MALD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and his PhD from the University of Oxford. Going back to today's theme, I am going to invite our co-chair emeritus, Roberta Cohen, the Honorable Roberta Cohen, to introduce today's topic, today's discussion. So, Roberta, I am going to turn this over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Greg, and special welcome to Mother of Greg, tuning in from Romania, and special appreciation to Ambassadors Bob King and Jung Hoon Lee for agreeing to discuss their roles in bringing human rights issues to the fore and integrating human rights concerns into their government's foreign policies toward North Korea. It is to be hoped that the position of Special Envoy in the United States and of Ambassador-at-Large in the Republic of Korea, the positions they've both held and which have been vacant more than 3 years, will again be filled and thereby signal both governments' intentions to give priority to human rights within a comprehensive policy toward North Korea. Human rights work regarding North Korea has faced many obstacles, especially limited access, but the position of Special Envoy has proved a valuable diplomatic tool. It's a relatively recent one. Consider that the Kim family dynasty has ruled North Korea for 75 years, and that crimes against humanity, among the gravest human rights violations, have been state policies for decades. Yet it was only in 2004, 60 years into Kim family rule, that the United Nations first appointed a special rapporteur on human rights in the DPRK, and that the United States appointed a special envoy. The Republic of Korea joined the club beginning in 2014. In examining the envoy's role, let me highlight 5 areas. First, the advocacy role played by the envoys within their own governments. As we know, there's a tendency, in fact, there's a strong tendency to set aside human rights concerns in North Korea for the sake of political and strategic priorities. Having someone in place on a daily basis and an ambassadorial level to remind everyone about the nature of the regime and its relationship and significance and impact on other issues could mean the difference in human rights being placed or not in statements of the president or foreign minister or in G8 communiques or in dialogues with China. These are all with considerable influence. Second is the diplomatic role of raising human rights issues directly with foreign governments, in particular North Korean officials. North Korea did allow Bob King entry, and in the course of discussions about humanitarian aid, he raised human rights issues and also played a role in gaining the release from prison of a Korean-American Christian missionary. Third is multilateral diplomacy at the United Nations, mobilizing states to initiate, co-sponsor, and vote for strong resolutions on human rights in North Korea that endorse the UN Commission of Inquiry's findings and recommendations, including on accountability. It certainly took a diplomatic effort, and I think both envoys were involved, in getting the human rights issue on the UN Security Council agenda beginning in 2014, which reinforced the link between international peace and security and the human rights situation in North Korea. Fourth, the public education role of drawing attention internationally to critical issues that need attention. Whether the abuse of North Koreans forcibly repatriated from China, more effective monitoring of humanitarian aid, the secret detention and ill treatment of political prisoners, or the expansion of broadcasting and other programs to breach the information wall around North Korea. And fifth, the important liaison role of the envoys with NGOs, defector groups, experts, academics, and the encouragement of funding for organizational programs. So we are all most interested in learning from the envoys about which objectives they feel they achieved, the restraints they faced from the North Korean government and from their own governments, the arguments they had to counter about possibly interfering with denuclearization progress, and what they would like to see their successors accomplish that they could not achieve. In conclusion, let me leave you with a warning. Any effort to weaken the role of the envoy or fail to fill the position will only benefit the North Korean government and reinforce its view repeatedly expressed that human rights promotion is an obstacle to peace. Furthermore, weakening the role will put another roadblock in the face of the North Korean people's achieving their human rights. Justice Michael Kirby said it well, that history will not look kindly on the Kim family, nor those who by their action or inaction enable its rule. Let's get behind a comprehensive approach that unites the political, strategic, economic, humanitarian, and human rights dimensions of relations with North Korea, because that's the surest route to bring genuine peace and stability to the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Roberta, thank you very much. That was terrific. And before I invite Ambassador King to give his remarks, let me also say that I'm delighted that we've also been joined by Tom Barker, member of the board of directors, and David Hawk, author of our Hidden Gulag and Parallel Gulag reports. Ambassador King, may I now turn over the floor, the mic, the screen to you.
Thanks very much, Greg. Thanks, Roberta, also for your comments about the role of the special envoy. It isn't there isn't that much of an established pattern in terms of having a special envoy dealing with a particular country, particular problems that are involved in human rights in one particular place like that. And the United States, the Congress in 2004 with the North Korean Human Rights Act decided that it would be helpful, it would be useful, and it would make sure that human rights was part of the discussion if there were an envoy, a person who was involved in the human rights issues that was part of the process of making decisions involving North Korea. And that was basically the idea behind the creation of the position. In 2008, when the legislation was reauthorized by the Congress, the position was elevated to an ambassadorial rank and required Senate confirmation. And the basic idea and the way I approached the position was that human rights needs to be a part of the discussion. It isn't the only issue, it's not the only topic, but it's an important one. And it's important to have someone who deals with human rights involved in discussions about other aspects of our relationship with North Korea. For example, questions came up when we were talking travel ban when I was in the position. And the question there was, yeah, there's probably some merit in limiting access to North Korea by American citizens because of the problems that has been creating, because people were not cautious, because the North Koreans were looking for ways of pressuring the United States. But at the same time, there were things that we could do in terms of how we shape that policy to make sure that humanitarian assistance was getting into North Korea and that people who were involved in these kind of activities were able to participate in that in traveling, because that's an essential part of what they do. So the idea was to make sure that the human rights angle on whatever policies we were dealing with North Korea was part of the discussion at senior levels when decisions were made. And having the rank of ambassador was something that was important in that regard. And so I think it was a very useful kind of thing in terms of dealing with that particular problem. The other element that I think is particularly important is having someone with diplomatic rank who can advocate on the human rights issues in various forums. One of the first things I did within a few days of my confirmation and swearing in as the special envoy was to go to Geneva to the Human Rights Council, to the discussions that were taking place there about the North Korea human rights issues. And having someone with diplomatic rank was very helpful, very useful. The United States had not been a member of the Human Rights Council. It became a member shortly after Obama was elected president. We still did not have an ambassador in Geneva who was representing the United States at the Human Rights Council. And when I was there, I was one of the earliest ambassadorial ranked individuals who was there speaking up on behalf of the United States. And simply having someone available to advocate on the human rights issues was a very important part of the special envoy position. One of the things that I considered a particularly important part of what I was doing was coordinating with the European Union. The European Union has played a key role on North Korean human rights. The EU and its various member states have played the important role in New York of directing the efforts on resolutions that have been adopted by the General Assembly. And so I made a point of visiting Geneva for the Human Rights Council, but then also including Brussels and visiting with the External Action Service of the European Union and also members of the European Parliament who are interested and involved in these human rights issues. And it was extremely helpful to have someone there who was concerned about North Korea and who was able to discuss these issues with many of our allies in various places. So I think that's one of the important elements as well in terms of the value of the human rights special envoy. The way the system has worked in the United States, I was involved in decisions that were being made by the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor on funding certain democracy projects. And it was useful and helpful to be a participant in that process and to look at various proposals that were coming in and what might be done and how things might be done, and to bring that into the perspective. One of the things that was also helpful is, and one of the issues that was important in the United States, was the question of defectors. The number of defectors who've come to the United States from North Korea is fairly small. We're talking somewhere around 225 or so people. The numbers have dried up. What was helpful is to have someone who was concerned about the defector issues, who was around speaking with American officials in places like Bangkok and other areas, and talking with them about the importance and the value that we saw in allowing these North Korean defectors who chose to come to the United States to have expeditious access and be able to handle those, be able to make those decisions. So simply having someone out there with a high enough rank to get attention means that the issue is going to get more attention, more focus than it would otherwise. And I think that's the importance, the value of having the special envoy. And I think for the last almost 4 years now, when we have not had a special envoy, I think there has been clearly a void at the Department of State in terms of not having the kind of attention and focus on the human rights issues as there should be. So I look forward to a time when hopefully we'll have the special envoy again, have someone appointed to that position. My sense is that Senator, now President-elect Biden, was heavily involved in the foreign affairs issues when the North Korea Human Rights Act was adopted in 2004, when it was reauthorized in 2008. He and his staff were very much involved in those decisions. And I think he understands the value and the importance of this because the congressional support is still there for the position. I look forward to seeing what happens when these changes take place and there's a different administration, but I hope that part of it will include the appointment of the new special envoy as soon as possible. Thanks very much.
Ambassador King, thank you very much. I'm now going to turn the floor over to His Excellency Jung Hoon. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Greg. Let me just begin by thanking you, Greg, and the staff of the HRNK for not only organizing this wonderful symposium, but really for all your efforts, for all the HRNK's efforts in championing the North Korean human rights issue that no other can, as no other can. So all the great work that you're doing, that you're continuing to do and making a difference is really something that we appreciate greatly. So I just want to start off with that. I would also like to thank Roberta for that excellent introductory commentary. It's always great to get back with Bob, whom I've worked for 4 years of my tenure very, very closely in our efforts to advance the awareness of the North Korean human rights and also make a difference and in improving the situation in North Korea. Let me begin by just saying, talking about some situation that's developing in Korea, because it's really very timely that we're doing this today, because just yesterday, what we had was in Korea, the ruling party, the Democratic Party of Korea, actually passing a bill at the National Assembly, which is, of course, the legislative body in Korea, that bans the sending of the leaflets to North Korea. And it's causing a great deal of backlash from the international community and certainly in Korea as well. Now, this is really a serious problem because there's no, with North Korea, what we have is probably the most cocooned and shut off country in the world. There's no access to this country. So the people of North Korea, not the government, but the people have very little access to information outside of that country. So the only way possible to provide the information that they have the right to know is through these methods. And our government has just denied one of the methods of sending information to North Korea. So this is a violation of the freedom of expression from our part, and also the freedom of information, access to information from North Korea. How else are they going to hear? Do they have free access to internet or TV programs, CNNs? No, they do not. So this was the only way to do this, and yet they banned this. And we can maybe talk about this further a little later, but this is a development. This is not coming out of the blues. There's been a trend towards this end, as we've seen, for example, last meaning in 2019, in November, there were 2 North Koreans who came down to South Korea, but they were charged for murder. And they were summarily investigated. And within a week, I think it was like 6 days, they were actually deported back to North Korea, despite their clear intentions to stay in Korea, in South Korea, that is. This was the first case of deportation against the wishes of those who've actually come down. So this actually, it brought up a whole range of questions about the nature of our, what our Constitution says. When they come to South Korea, we refer to them as refugees. But the fact of the matter is, when they come back, what happens is that they're basically, with their intentions to stay in Korea or settle in Korea, they are recovering their citizenship, which was temporarily sort of lost or not claimed during the time that they've been in North Korea, because our Constitution says that our jurisdiction is throughout the entire Korean peninsula. So that was in November 2019. And then earlier in June this year, we've had the North Korean, the sister of the leader Kim Jong-un, Kim Yo-jong, getting very upset about the leaflets coming into North Korea, and she went into a tirade, and this immediately led to the blowing up of the liaison office, which South Korea built with South Korean taxpayers' money, to the amount of, I mean, that's something like $70 million building. They just blew it up. And this was followed up by a great deal of what happened in South Korea was that the South Korean government actually cut off a lot of the funding of many of the North Korean human rights NGOs. Not only that, over 20 NGOs have been audited and investigated as a result of this. Again, in September this year, so just a few months ago, South Korean government declines to co-sponsor North Korean human rights resolution at the General Assembly. This was second year in a row. Following last year, we did that again. And then another development in September this year was that South Korean government official was actually killed, executed. He drifted into the North Korean waters, and he was point blank shot dead. And the problem with that was that instead of taking a very protective and defensive approach, asking, demanding for investigation and an apology from the North, we took a very passive approach, almost criminalizing the individual, the government official who got killed, as if he was trying to defect to North Korea because he had debts in South Korea, which of course his family has been denying up to this point. So what has happened at the National Assembly in passing this bill, my point is a very disturbing sort of trend in South Korea that has been when we really should be at the forefront of championing North Korean human rights, we've been taking a very, very passive and in fact position that's contrary to what we should be doing. So this is something that I think we should keep in mind as a background to what is going on in South Korea right now. And that's why this position of North Korean human rights ambassador is probably needed more so than ever before. But unfortunately, that is not the case. As you know, that I was appointed the ambassador for North Korean human rights, the very first ambassador, and then I remained the only ambassador for North Korean human rights because after I stepped down in 2017, my successor has not been appointed. And I'm afraid that that may remain the case for the remainder of the current government. And that's really a shame because there's so much that this position can provide, not because I played that role, but this position can play an instrumental role in not only in dealing with the issue at the international level, but even within South Korea. I mean, we have many different agencies. We have the Unification Ministry, we have the Foreign Ministry, we have the Justice Ministry, we have the Blue House. So my role was to play a role to somehow coordinate the North Korea human rights policy. And I think we were in the previous government, at least on this front, very successful in doing that. So this is one area. This is a position that really needs to be filled soon. But if the South Korean government doesn't do it, whether the Biden administration's appointment of Bob Robert King's successor plays a role in somehow putting the pressure on South Korea to do so, I think that would be great. But voluntarily on our own, I'm afraid that may not be the case. So I'll just leave it at that, and maybe we can have more Q&A session, and then I can talk more about this position and the role that I've played in the past.
Ambassador Jung Hoon, thank you very much. His Excellency Jung Hoon, the Honorable Robert King, the Honorable Roberta Cohen, you have all been such great champions of this cause. My favorite saying these days is that we have more human rights ambassadors, North Korean human rights ambassadors on our board at HRNK than both the governments of the United States and the Republic of Korea combined. And yes, that was a challenge. We look forward to special envoys being appointed moving forward, as you have highlighted the critical importance of this set of issues that you addressed. And let me just say one more thing. You are known as great scholars and diplomats, but both of you were also great friends, allies, and supporters of civil society organizations. I'm the lucky one because I have you on my board right now, but you are dearly missed by NGOs, human rights NGOs in the United States, in the Republic of Korea, and elsewhere. Now, let me turn toward our Q&A session, and the first questions actually come from a board member, from Colonel Professor David Maxwell. The first question goes to Ambassador King. Thank you for your remarks. David wishes to thank all speakers. Could you please describe whether and how all actions were synchronized within the US government amongst agencies that had responsibilities for various policies and strategies toward North Korea? So how did the Department of State, the Department of Defense, USAID coordinate with the then special envoy for North Korea policy, as well as with you, the special envoy for North Korean human rights, in order to act as a united front and in a unified manner toward North Korea, ensuring, as Dave puts it, that the right hand was talking to the left. And again, this is David Maxwell from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Dave also has questions for Ambassador Lee. Ambassador Lee, thank you for your remarks on the Kim Yo-jong law in South Korea, the law that has just been passed. Will this be actually the first crisis for the Biden administration in Korea? The fundamental question for the alliance is, are we going to return to an interest-based and values-based alliance, the shared values of freedom, the shared values of individual liberty, liberal democracy, free market economics, rule of law, and human rights? Professor Maxwell states that this new law is in contravention to a number of these shared values. Another question for both the Honorable Roberta Cohen and Ambassador King: how should the Biden administration address South Korea, the Republic of Korea, on this particular law that is contradictory to our shared values? Thank you very much. And we will go to Ambassador King first.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, David, for your question. I think there are some interesting issues here. One of the things that I think we tried to do in terms of synchronizing policy, making sure the policy was coordinated, was to make sure that the special envoy had a place that was part of the process. Steve Bosworth was the special representative for North Korea policy when I was confirmed as the special envoy. And my office was right next to Steve's office. Now, he wasn't there all the time. He was doing this part-time. But in addition, I was working very closely with the Korea desk at the State Department, with the East Asia Bureau. And most of what I did was coordinated very closely with the East Asia Bureau. In addition to that, I had contacts and dealt with people in the other parts of the State Department, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and various others who are involved in these kind of issues. But the real thing is sort of the physical presence, the fact that my office was in the East Asia Bureau suite of offices, that I was in the same particular suite with the special representative for North Korea policy, and the people that I worked most closely were on the Korea desk, made this coordination process very easy, and it worked very conveniently, worked very well. With AID, we worked very closely with AID when there were issues that were involving U.S. humanitarian assistance. John Browse, who was a deputy assistant director at AID, worked very closely with me. The two of us were part of the mission that went to North Korea in May of 2011, when we were considering providing humanitarian assistance. The two of us worked very closely together and worked and coordinated very well. Department of Defense, I met with most of the people who were involved at the Department of Defense on the Korea issues, the senior people who were involved. I met with them in Washington in various meetings that we held. I made a point when I was in Korea of meeting with the various military people who were engaged and involved there, both those who were involved in various activities at various levels, those who were involved in intelligence activities and so forth. So the thing that made the job work is that my position was part of the State Department. I was integrated fully within the State Department and with the other US agencies that were involved on North Korea policy. Do you want me to comment on on Biden and what might happen, or do you want to have Lee Jung Hoon comment on some of the same issues that David raised with him?
If possible, we would like to hear from both of you, Ambassador King, if that is all right.
Okay.
Shall we go to the Honorable Roberta Cohen next?
Let me just say very briefly that the United States and South Korea are going to have to iron out so many tensions in the relationship. And one of them will have to do with the approach to human rights. And what Jung Hoon Lee, Ambassador, referred to as a rather passive approach now of South Korea on human rights. And having a united front is a very important part of having an alliance and a negotiating front vis-a-vis North Korea. And it has broken down in the human rights area. So that will be one that's going to have to, that the US is going to have to take a hard look at, and as well as the Moon administration, and then whatever follows then the Moon administration. But let me say that the point I would make is that human rights is not a weapon. It's been used as a weapon the last number of years. A weapon that either wants to gain North Korea's sit down at negotiations or some other concessions. And then it's dropped when those objectives are met. But as I see human rights, it's a set of issues and a serious set to be negotiated with the North Koreans. And there, I think it would be important for the Biden administration to work out what those priority issues are with South Korea and try together to redevelop and develop a united front on issues, whether they have to do with detentions of South Koreans, for example, in prison in North Korea. Americans have been released, whether it's family reunifications, whether it's access, whether it's greater information freedom, and whether it's the prison camps. There has to be a joint alliance way, or the abduction issue, which would join in Japan. So this is very sorely in need of looking at it from a negotiating point of view, not seeing human rights as a weapon and not seeing it as some sort of great public denunciation and saying that's human rights. That's not. And so there I would hope that the alliance would come together and move forward together.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Lee Jung Hoon, shall we go to you next?
Yeah, well, thank you, David, for your question. I think the alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States has always been based on values, shared values on liberal democracy, most of all, human rights, and so on. And our shared security interest is based on those shared values that we have. So, and we've never wavered on that. And I hope that remains the case into the Biden administration. So, I don't know what holds for the next U.S. administration, but we meaning here in South Korea, we have very high hopes for the position that he will be taking on the North Korean human rights issue, which under the current Trump administration started off very well, I think, where he invited even Ji Sung-ho, who is now currently the National Assemblyman for the opposition party, defector, to the State of the Union. President Trump invited the North Korean defectors, which I know that, Greg, you helped out also, to the White House. But since the Singaporean summit meeting, he's really backtracked on his stance on the North Korean human rights issues. So I hope that we return to a state of normalcy in dealing with the human rights issue under the next administration. I think the biggest mistake that you could have, I can only speak for South Korea, is that somehow by not pressing on the North Korean human rights issue, that this could somehow lead to a better relationship, inter-Korean relationship, that this could lead to maybe denuclearization of North Korea, or maybe some sort of an improvement in the condition of living for the North Korean people. If you look at the history of inter-Korean relations, that has never really happened, right? So I think these issues have to be separated out. And just because you focus on the human rights issue, it does not automatically lead to a deterioration of bilateral relations between North Korea and South Korea. In fact, you might have just the opposite outcome. We've seen that with the COI report, which our good friend Michael Kirby made available. And with the COI report and the recommendations, and as the UN General Assembly was about to adopt the recommendations into the resolution, if you recall, in 2014, the responses that North Korean government had made at that time, it was very, very conciliatory. So we were of the position that, we knew that, this is the Achilles gun of North Korea. North Korea is very, very sensitive when it comes to the human rights issues. And therefore, I really hope that when the new administration comes in the US, that this becomes, the human rights issue becomes one of the focal points, return to one of the focal points in dealing with North Korea. Yes, North Korea is going to, make statements and maybe, resort to some provocations. But that's always been the case. So you have to withstand that. And once you're able to overcome that and cross the threshold, that's when North Korea will engage in genuine dialogue. But if you always succumb to these provocations, you will never get any results. And that's been the case for decades. And therefore, I hope that the Biden administration will break that really bad pattern in dealing with North Korea and become outcome oriented when it comes to this issue.
Mr. Lee, thank you very much. Before we turn to Ambassador King for his remarks, let me ask the next round of questions, and I'm going to direct them to the Honorable Roberta Cohen and Ambassador Jung Hoon. Ambassador Donna Lady Dugan points out that the United States has become increasingly critical of the oppression of Uyghurs in China. And this question is going to go to you, Roberta. Why has the international community been so quiet on all of these problems that we hear about in South Korea? Repression of North Korean human rights groups, repression of North Korean freedom fighters, including North Korean escapees. There's also a question that comes from David Hawk, the author of numerous HRNK reports, thought leader on the political prison camp system of North Korea. Very straightforward question directed to you, Ambassador Jung Hoon. Would not a Moon-appointed special envoy for human rights in North Korea likely be an anti-human rights ally of the current Ministry of Unification? So maybe moving forward, it would be better to just keep the post vacant. Thank you. And now let me turn to Ambassador King.
One of the questions was what role or what might Biden do in terms of appointment of a special envoy? As I said, I think there's a good chance that he will appoint someone. And I think that's important because there is a strong interest in the Congress. When the North Korea Human Rights Act was reauthorized 2 years ago, the only vote taken during the course of the reauthorization was one House vote where it was a unanimous vote, 416 to nothing. The Senate did it by consensus, unanimous agreement. So there's very strong support for the special envoy in Congress. And so I think that there is likely to be some greater interest and attention to paying to making sure that that position is filled. This is not something that I think is going to happen quickly. When I was appointed, my appointment took about 10 months from the time the Biden or the Obama administration came into office until I was sworn in. It takes a while to do this. The senior positions have already been designated. Tony Blinken has been nominated, or Biden has announced his intention to nominate. And it's likely that most of those very early cabinet positions will be filled fairly quickly. Some of them will be filled on the day of the inauguration, if everything goes well. Others within a week or two. But it takes a while before you get to the level of ambassadors, special envoys, that kind of thing. In my case, I was asked to accept that position by Secretary Clinton at the end of May. And it took until November before the Senate acted and I was able to be confirmed. So it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen overnight. The one thing that I think is important in terms of looking at how you make the special envoy position work is that there has to be some balance between how far do you push on the North Koreans, how far are you successful in terms of pushing on the North Koreans, and how far can you go without disrupting relations? And it's a tough choice because on the one hand, you don't want to back down on human rights. On the other hand, you don't want to alienate the North Koreans to the point they won't have anything to do with the issue. And so it becomes a delicate balance in terms of how far you go, what you can do, and how you go about doing it. The North Koreans were not particularly positive when I was first nominated and confirmed. They had some negative comments that were published. Later, as we got to the point of responding to a request from the North Koreans about providing humanitarian aid, Steve Bosworth said, go talk to the North Koreans about humanitarian aid. And the fact that I was the one that held the negotiations with the North Koreans on humanitarian aid allowed me to show that there were some concerns that I had that were similar to the concerns the North Korean government had, and that is providing assistance, food assistance for the people of North Korea. It was a very interesting comment that I got from one of the North Korean diplomats in New York that we were talking to. He said, Ambassador King, we like you, we don't like your title. And I think that's kind of where we have to go, is that we have to get to the point in terms of pressing them on human rights that it's not totally negative. And I think, for example, the North Koreans have been criticized in Geneva for a lot of things. One of the things that was raised, I raised it the first time I was in Geneva in December of 2009, was the question of providing assistance to persons with disabilities. It was an issue that didn't have a lot of political damage for the North Koreans to provide assistance to people with disabilities. And it was easier to do because there were people in the North Korean elite who had children who were disabled or who had family members who had disabilities. And so pressing on some of these kind of things and moving forward on issues that aren't totally controversial in some ways can help open doors and can help push in the right direction. On the other hand, you can't completely ignore the fact that there are prison camps and that thousands of tens of thousands, almost up to 100,000 North Koreans are in prison camps. These are kinds of things that you need to kind of balance between pressing them on things they don't want to hear and being helpful to them on things that you do want to hear. Not an easy task.
Thank you, Ambassador King. And before we go to Co-Chair Emeritus Roberta Cohen and Ambassador Jung Hoon, let me warn you, Ambassador King, that the next question from Felice Gay, president of the Jacob Blaustein Institute, JBI, in New York City, will go to you. Ambassador King, you mentioned the value of being physically located in the East Asia Bureau at the Department of State, surrounded by others concerned with policy toward North Korea, toward the DPRK. Would you have had as much support, or perhaps more support, if you had been physically and legally located in the Human Rights Bureau with the Assistant Secretary, or even in the Global Affairs Undersecretary's office, such as, for example, the Tibet Envoy? The next question after that will go to both Roberta and Ambassador Jung Hoon. It's a question from Frank at USIP. Freedom of expression is a fundamental human right, but it is not absolute. And many countries have time, place, and manner restrictions to address certain situations. And Frank refers to libel, slander, pornography, public security, and other issues. So the question from Frank is, are there ways to maximize freedom of expression while also taking into account governmental concerns about security, since the leaflets antagonize North Korea and have even caused them to shoot balloons down? Thank you. And now, Roberta, the Honorable Roberta Cohen, I'm going to go to you on the previous question.
Okay, if I understood you right, Greg, you were asking why the international community has been quiet with regard to the South Korea.
Indeed, and there was a question from Ambassador Donna Lady. Yes.
I would say that the international non-governmental community has been remarkably outspoken on the whole issue of the leaflets. I mean, Greg, you and the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, but hundreds of NGOs have just signed on to a statement now, I think organized by Human Rights Watch, but that basically summarizes the concerns they have with how North Korean groups and human rights groups for North Korea in South Korea are being restrained, and would seem largely for political reasons. Now, so the NGO community and a lot of prominent individuals are quite concerned. Why there isn't a great outcry, I think, that you're speaking about by governments. Here I would go back to something that Jung Hoon Lee said. I mean, South Korea is on the front line with North Korea and is basically struggling with a very aggressive and nuclear armed state. There are great concerns about security, and there's a desire and to seek a better relationship with North Korea. And the question is how you accomplish that. So I think there is a reticence to try to get involved in attacking or pressuring South Korea. But I think it would be important for the Biden administration to come in, as I said before, to work out with them some sort of united position with regard to how you deal with human rights in North Korea. And one just doesn't cave all the time in terms of deferring to North Korea and letting them set the agenda on human rights. Human rights is not their sole monopoly by any stretch of the imagination in terms of agenda items. Should I refer to Frank On's question now?
Yes, please, if possible.
Yes. Oh, okay. So just to continue, yes, of course, there are government restrictions that might be on freedom of expression. But in this particular case, I think that Ambassador Lee mentioned that what kind of access do North Korean people have to information? If we see this in a broader question of information, they don't have access to the internet except some in the elite. They don't have the newspapers. They don't have the kind of basic information that the rest of the world has. They're such a closed off, isolated, for one very good reason, to maintain the control of the Kim family government. So here is an effort and to try to bring into North Korea information. Now, the only point I think that Frank may have that I could agree with is that some leaflets may be ones that are just not really supplying information, but perhaps they go over the line and are extraordinarily antagonistic. I haven't seen all the what goes on in all these shipments, but I've heard enough about them to know that UN Information does, the Commission of Inquiry and what its findings were, that goes in some of these. There may be all kinds of information about international issues, whether it's economic or social, or even about COVID-19 that people in North Korea have no idea about. So being able to send leaflets, it's one route to try to help break through that terrible information blockade around North Korea. And I can't possibly agree with any efforts to try to restrict that. The organizations themselves can look at their own material, but North Korea regards anything that has to do with information they don't control as antagonistic to North Korea. Certainly, I don't think South Korea or any other government or anyone can accept their version of what's acceptable in terms of information and try to, in some way, enable those restrictions that they carry out in their own society, which are just really draconian in terms of education and in terms of outlook and in terms of even having information that might help you in your daily life. It's just a way of gaining access and breaking through an information wall. And I really don't see any argument that is going to support the North Korean position on this.
Thank you very much. And next, Ambassador Jung Hoon, David Hawk's question: better off with or without a North Korean human rights ambassador in South Korea?
Well, thank you for that question, David. Long time no see. I just want to say hello first. It's a very good question, and maybe you're right to suggest that it's probably better off remaining vacant. But I think if the Biden administration does appoint a special envoy, successor to Bob, I think that will put some pressure on the Moon administration to respond in one way or another. So, but to think that it would actually appoint someone who's been a North Korean human rights sort of like fighter, I don't think that's going to happen. So if it does appoint someone, it will probably be someone who will put a lot of focus on humanitarian assistance. So human rights, a view of human rights in terms of the North Korean people's right to food, right to medicine. So based on that, that it is the duty of South Korean government to provide assistance. That's real human rights issue. So now whether that will be good or not is something to think about. But I think even at that, I think it would still be better than keeping it vacant, because even if that person is focused primarily on humanitarian assistance, he or she will be forced to deal with all the human rights community in the world at the United Nations, at EU, and with all the NGOs per se, like the HRNK. And I think that's better than not having any sort of government representation on this issue. On the second point raised by Frank Am, I just want to point out two things. First, of course, North Korea is angry. Why is North Korea angry? North Korea is angry because North Korea wants a total 100% control over all the information that the people have access to, right? They don't want any other information coming in. Then what is the information provided by the North Korean government? It's all propaganda. So my question to you might be, are you okay with that? Is that a state that you will be you're satisfied with? I don't think so. So there has to be, as Roberta pointed out, some channel of information going into North Korea that's outside of what the government provides. And I can't imagine any other way will be acceptable, because it is a totalitarian society, right? And we have to provide some sort of information that's outside the what is being provided by the government. The second point is the fact that is this assumption that what is being sent in leaflets is all sort of like scathing critique or criticism, portraying Kim Jong-un as monster and so on. That's not the case at all. They send radios, they send USBs with South Korean dramas and K-pops. They send money, US dollars. They send information about the outside world, maybe including COVID-19. So there's a whole range of things being sent to North Korea. Just general information about the outside world, about South Korea, about the international community. So it's not just about the Kim family and criticism of Kim family. So to assume that it is this like slanders of the leadership over there only being sent to North Korea, that's a false assumption.
Ambassador Jung Hoon, thank you very much. As your moderator, I apologize, we have gone into overtime, but we have a terrific panel and a few great questions. So please do bear with me. And before we turn the floor over to Ambassador Robert King from Felice Guerre's question about the location of the Special Envoy, EAP, DRL, Global Affairs, let me direct the first before last question to the Honorable Roberta Cohen. It comes from Ben Willis. If the incoming Biden administration recommits to formal discussion of the agenda item at the UN Security Council For what it's worth, should the coalition of like-minded states consider putting forward a Chapter 7 resolution on targeted sanctions or ICC referral, even if this were to achieve nothing more than just placing Chinese and Russian veto objections on the record? So should the coalition of the like-minded become more aggressive at the UN Security Council? And a question directed to Ambassador Lee Jung Hoon, finally, from Ambassador Annalady Dugan. Why hasn't there been more pushback from Korean citizens or from the free press in the Republic of Korea against President Moon and his traditionally human rights activist party? Ambassador King, we're now going to turn the floor over to you.
First of all, I want to say hello, Felice. It's good to at least hear from you. We appreciate what Jacob Blaustein Institute has done and the contribution that you have made at the United Nations on these issues. With regard to your question about the location of the special envoy within the State Department bureaucracy, I think probably the East Asia Bureau, which is where I was, is the place the envoy ought to be. For better or for worse, the State Department functions with the regional bureaus being the first among equals. They're very clearly, when you communicate with an embassy, it's through the regional bureaus. It's not through global affairs. It's not through the Human Rights Bureau. And it makes it easier in a lot of ways if you're at the point where the communications are taking place. I had a very good relationship with the people in the Human Rights Bureau. I dealt with people in global affairs, but I was very clearly convinced that the best place to be was where I was with the East Asia Bureau, the regional bureau. Tibet is in the Global Affairs Bureau because it infuriates the Chinese, and we still have diplomatic relations with China. We don't have diplomatic relations with North Korea, so keeping the special envoy in the regional bureau doesn't create problems. I think that makes sense in terms of that. Let me make one quick comment on the leaflet issue. The leaflet issue, I think, in South Korea is much more a symbol than it is a reality in terms of the value and the importance and the urgency of its contribution to information for North Korea. When you look at the reporting that's done about the surveys that have been taken, how do North Koreans get information? What are the sources of information? Radio clearly is the most important way people find out what's going on. And leaflets don't really make much of a role in that. Leaflets have become a much more polarizing issue. And particularly in the South Korean context, it's more of an issue between those who are anxious to be more engaged on the human rights issues and those who want to engage the North Koreans without getting into the human rights issue. And I would argue that that's probably more of that kind of an issue. I used to work at Radio Free Europe in the days when I wrote a history of the Romanian Communist Party. And one of the things that was very clear, Radio Free Europe had in a good amount of money in the 1950s that was spent on sending balloons to places like Czechoslovakia and Poland and Hungary. Most of them didn't make it as far as Romania. But what we found is that even with meteorologists who understood weather and who knew where the winds were blowing and the direction they were going, the dispersion of information with leaflets was of limited value. Symbolically, it played a more important role. Photographically, pictures of balloons going over the border into North Korea is far more significant than taking a photograph of a radio tower that is broadcasting into North Korea. So it's an issue, it's an important issue because the question is, do we focus more effort and attention on human rights? And the answer is yes. Is the solution leaflets, or is, I think it's more a domestic political issue than it's a question of vital importance in terms of human rights in the North. Excuse me for my controversial comment.
Thank you, Ambassador King. And we will go to Co-Chair Emeritus Roberta Cohen for the question on the Security Council.
Yes, I just wanted to add one thing, though, to what Bob King was saying. And I would hope that if there were any negotiations with North Korea having to do with information and having to do with human rights issues, that the arrest of people in North Korea for listening to Voice of America or to Radio Free Europe ought to be on the table. Because if there is going to be any kind of engagement and relationship, then it'd be very hard to have people arrested listening to broadcasts coming from the United States with information for North Koreans. With regard to the Security Council, I don't think it's time yet, frankly, to bring everything to some to a real standoff with China and Russia, which will veto the resolution. I think a lot more needs to be done. There hasn't been a Security Council focus on human rights. There's been this private Security Council meeting that just took place that was a surprise, because last year and the year before, I believe there were no such meetings, and the US dropped the ball, particularly on one. I think it would be time to have those Security Council meetings, getting the votes to bring the issue on the agenda, and communicating a lot of information and having more education about the situation in North Korea and the relationship of peace and security to the actual conditions in the country, and begin to develop a viewpoint and influence other governments before it just becomes a big fight over targeted sanctions. And I would hope one could build up, and it was going in that direction in 2014 and 15 and 16, moving along and having this annual Security Council gathering and a bit more done at each one. And then it stopped. I think it first needs to be repaired and then see where we go before we move into a veto that could close off rather than widen the route to get where we want to go.
Thank you very much. And Ambassador Jung Hoon, before you answer this final question, let me also share something that David Hawk has placed in the chat. Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa said early on that the Moon administration would support North Korean human rights concerns at the international level. However, in 2019, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was overruled by the Blue House based on what we know. Could you please explain what happened there, and could you share more about those circumstances?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In addition, well, if possible, I know it's a lot to ask, but David Hawk was wondering if you know more about the background surrounding this change of heart and this change of mind. The Foreign Ministry intending to address this issue initially on the world stage and then giving up on this issue on the world stage. Based on what we know, this was a matter of the relationship between the Blue House and the Foreign Office and the Foreign Ministry. If you can share your thoughts on this, fine. If not, that's fine. We'll just take
well, I mean, it's I wish I knew more, but I really don't, as far as the current government is concerned, in terms of the inner dealings amongst them on these issues. So it's good to know that at least the Foreign Ministry may have tried. I don't know the validity of that, but if it did, kudos to the ministry. But unfortunately, that's not the outcome. And it's really the outcome and the policy that matters. And unfortunately, I don't know what the interaction might have been between the agency and the Blue House, but the outcome, the policy outcome has been for the past 3-4 years has always been that our government has taken a very passive stance on this issue, as reflected in 2019 and 2020 of us not co-sponsoring the North Korean human rights resolution. So I think it's really a moot point because in the end, she followed the government policy. Maybe in the US or in other countries, if that might be the case, that you would see some sort of resignation from the position because of the policy difference. But we don't have that, right? You have the continuation of assuming the position and following a policy that maybe deep in your heart it doesn't sit well with you. So that's all I can say on that. On this, I just want to say one small thing about the leaflet issue. It's not just about South Korea sending leaflets. North Korea continues to send leaflets to South Korea as well. I play a lot of tennis, outdoor tennis. Recently, because of COVID-19, it's been all shut down. But time and again, we pick up these North Korean leaflets on tennis courts on Yonsei campus. And if you lift up and see, it's your typical American imperialist soldier, bayoneting a South Korean victims and people, and then we just laugh and throw it away. So it's not like we're the only ones sending leaflets. We get all these propaganda materials from North Korea as well. On the question of the why there's no stronger pushback on this issue against the government, it's a very good question, and it's very hard to answer. But I might just point out two things. Number one, I think this is the realm where the opposition party has to play a much stronger role. But unfortunately, the opposition party in Korea today is very, very weak. And it is really struggling to find its own identity. Sure, you have Ji Sung-ho and Tae Yong-ho, the two defectors in the opposition party, but I'm talking about the leadership. The leadership it just looks like it's very confused about what it stands for. What is the vision for Korea? What are some of the important political platforms that it should be standing on? And with that confusion, it is failing to address this issue of North Korean human rights as it should. The second point about this is the media. The South Korea's main media is constantly playing this narrative that what is good for South Korea, good meaning avoiding war and improving relations with North Korea, is to stay non-provocative. Okay, so that's the narrative that's coming from all the major media network. And why is that the case? It is because of the very, very strong influence of the trade unions in the media. And the trade unions have a very, very close alliance with the current government. And obviously, it is airing programs or writing op-eds or whatever that will be synchronized with the government stance and government policies.
Thank you very much. And before I thank our panelists and all participants, let me remind everyone that our next program will take place this coming Thursday. Again, a Zoom program featuring Dr. Marcus Noland and Dr. Steph Haggard. The program is entitled Hunger and Human Rights, 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, the 17th of December. To the Honorable Roberta Cohen, the Honorable Robert King, and His Excellency Ambassador Jung Hoon, thank you very much for being so generous with your time and knowledge. Thank you for being leaders, for being thought leaders, scholars, and such enthusiastic and relentless champions of our good cause. We will have a recording of this program. I really think we can turn it into a textbook or a playbook on North Korean human rights. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a very pleasant evening and a wonderful day, Ambassador Jung Hoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Keep safe.
Thank you,
Roberta?
Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah.